This is The Republic, Book 9. Presenters are Justin, Jacob, Jack, and myself, Michael. So, the beginning 3 pages. The summary of the pages 386 to 389. I've broken this up into 3 different parts. The summary of how the whole discussion is thus far, how is a tyrannical man formed, and tyrannical men being slaves to their own appetites and desires. So, the summarization of the discussion thus far. Socrates is giving his response to Glaucon's points made in Book 2 regarding tyranny. Socrates gives examples of 5 different character types and or cities. The happiest and most virtuous is the philosopher king, and the tyrant being the worst of them all. He also outlines the characters of the soul. There's money lovers, honor lovers, and wisdom lovers. They are called the tripartition of souls. The philosopher king is a wisdom lover and has experienced all other forms of loving in his youth. The pleasure of wisdom sought out by the philosopher king is the truest and most purest form of pleasure. The tyrant is the lowest and are slaves to themselves. So, how is a tyrannical man formed? Think about the nature that comes out in a dream. It's a beastly nature of a man that has no regard for anything but himself. Now apply that dream concept to an actual person. That is a tyrannical man. That's how they act. They cause little evils everywhere they go, stealing, robbing, anything that's bad they essentially do. They only care about themselves. The tyrannical man will even take out his own frustrations and arms against his own mother and father. Men become tyrannical by associating themselves with flatterers and yes men. They posture themselves when they need to and only do so to exploit others. They have no regard for anything else besides themselves. So, tyrannical men are slaves. Just like the inhabitants of the tyrannical city, tyrannical men are enslaved. The soul of the man is poor and has an insatiable hunger for personal desires. The tyrannical man is enslaved to his own personal appetites, vices, and passions. Tyrannical man is wretched, but he is not the most wretched man. The most wretched man is the tyrannical man who becomes a tyrant. He's a slave to his own life, and the people below him also end up turning to slaves.
Alright, so now we'll move on to the next 3 pages of Book 9 in the Republic, where Socrates talks a lot about tyrants and repeats a lot of the same ideas that he says in the first 3 pages. So basically tyrants, they're always looking to fulfill their appetites, right? So because of this, they're never really satisfied. They're always looking for more, whether it be money or power or lust, and they're never really fulfilled. Also, tyrants, they never really make friends. So basically, if you think about it, tyrants, they're ruling their people. They never really connect with people. They're not connecting with them on a personal level. It's more of like an inferior superior relationship, and basically tyrants are just the master of their slaves, and there's no like personal connection there. Also, Socrates basically says, I mean, as long as you're a tyrant, you're gonna always be wretched, because with being a tyrant comes this never being fulfilled, your appetites never being fulfilled, and these relationships never being personal. Alright, moving on. Socrates speaks with Glaucon about comparing a city to its ruler, basically. So, the city reflects the state of a tyrant, right? So, a tyrannical city is enslaved, and likewise, the tyrant is enslaved and doesn't truly have the freedom. He compares it to a democracy where the people are free, they have a say, and likewise, the officials have a say, and they're free in the sense that they're doing what the people want. The tyrant has no true power. So the tyrant, if you think about it, one man is not stronger than any other man alone. If a tyrant doesn't have his army, then without his army, he has no power. He's just simply a man. And basically, this Socrates raises the question if anyone really does have freedom in a tyrannical city. And Glaucon argues that, yeah, the highest officials do, but in reality, they don't. They're slaves of having to rule their people, and like mentioned in the slide before, they're always trying to fulfill appetites, and they're slaves to those appetites. So then again, a tyrant is a slave himself. So, like it was said on the first 3 pages as well, tyrants are slaves themselves because of their appetites. And they give a really good example of if a tyrant would be put in the middle of nowhere with no army and none of his other officials, in the middle of nowhere with all his slaves, then basically the slaves would have the power because there's more of them compared to the tyrant. The slaves would end up killing the tyrant. And so this just shows that the tyrant really has no overarching power over them. It's simply because of the way things are. And the tyrant just got the luck of the draw to be put where he is.
Okay, so the summary of these next 3 pages, the main topics I got from was profit loving, which is you value wealth over everything, and in the end, it's the most least pleasant life. Next, I have honor loving, which is you value honor over everything, which is the second most least pleasant life. And then in the end, is truth loving, which is you value truth and knowledge over everything, and is the most pleasant life. Okay, so first we have profit loving. This is your whole life revolves around making money, and you centralize all your life just around wealth. So this person believes in being wealthy leads to the ultimate pleasure. It also believes that the pleasures of being honored or learning are immeasurable unless something with money is involved. This is the least pleasant life because a profit lover does not care about knowledge or learning unless it comes with the financial benefits. Therefore, a person with such a closed, conformed mind can never experience real pleasure. The honor lover is more of a modest person but still lacks in pleasure. The honor lover is a person who believes if they do something and it doesn't end in them being honored, then it was worthless. So say for instance, someone has a cure for cancer and they cure cancer, all right? And in the end, they don't get honored for it. So they feel that it's worthless. But in reality, it's not worthless because they help billions of people. But to them, since they're an honor lover, they feel it's worthless. Our last is truth loving. This is the only real and respectable pleasure. The truth loving person experiences all 3 pleasures but does not prioritize one over the other. This is why this is the most pleasurable of them all. The most capable to judge is the philosopher. He attains what the other 2 simply cannot. So this, the truth lover basically has a combination of the 2, which is the prophet and the honor lovers. And he kind of balances them out by using his intellect and his knowledge. He can balance the 2 and have the most pleasurable life.
And now we will start with the last 4 pages of this book. So going right into it, we have the care for the body holds less standing than care for the soul. The divide between the truth and pleasure of king and tyrant is both quantified and justified, as well as men are not one creature, but a complex of beasts under the shell of a human form. How we praise what is just or unjust determines the fates of our different inner beings. So let's just go ahead and dive right into each of those kind of separately. Aspects of the body are less than subjects of the soul. Types concerned with care for the body partake less in truth and being than those concerned with care for the soul. And so what Plato is trying to express here is that we should care more for our soul than our physical body, as we cannot take our physical body with us when we die, but our soul is eternal. And going further, being filled with what is appropriate and more leads to truth and a more true pleasure, whereas to partake in things that are less brings less trustworthy and less true pleasure. And what this more and less kind of encompass are the truth, doing justice, that kind of thing. That's more, and doing less would be doing injustice, avoiding the truth, that kind of thing. A tyrant will be most distant from his own true pleasure, while a king will be least distant, and we are going to dive into that point as well right about now. The divide between tyranny and kingship. Tyrants and philosopher kings find themselves on opposite sides of the spectrum pertaining to virtue and true happiness. And so Plato kind of sets up the spectrum to kind of quantify and really show you exactly what he's talking about when he says that philosopher kings will live a better life in terms of happiness, truth, that kind of thing. And then he goes and lists this order as from least great distance to greatest distance of, again, this true happiness, this virtue. It will be philosopher king, timocrat, oligarch, democrat, and tyrant. You see, there's 3 whole places in between philosopher king and tyrant. Exactly opposite sides of that spectrum. One the best, one the worst. And by Plato's logic, since the tyrant is 3rd removed from the oligarch, and the oligarch is third removed from the king on the basis of the square and cube. The king lives 729 times more pleasantly, while the tyrant lives the same number of times more painfully, which is a pretty big number. Plato counts the position that he starts at as 1, which is why it says third removed for both, whereas we would consider twice removed, but because he used that, that's the number he got, and so that is his logic. Lastly, the multi-being beast we call man. In an attempt to refute the argument that doing injustice profits unjust men, Plato creates the image of a human soul. Plato attempts to fashion the human soul into words, describing it as being made of many different kinds grown into one, which consists of a beast with many heads of changing tame and wild animals, a lion of larger stature than the human, and a human of smaller stature than the lion. And so this is what comprises the soul, and this resides inside the human shell, right? That's what he's talking about here. In this setting, doing injustice may benefit the man's shell on the outside, right? But on the inside, it truly feeds the beast inside, which will proceed to feast on the man himself. So internally, it sets this inner conflict in the soul, which more legitimately destroys the person, whereas on the outside, he may look fine. The human represents our humanity and elemental balance, while the beast represents our lawless appetites. And this is what we must keep in harmony and in check in our soul by doing justice, by acting truthfully, by being true being, right? It's exactly what Plato's talking about here, by feeding our soul instead of our physical body, right? We must act justly, and that way we may not suffer these consequences.